Let's talk honestly for a moment because too many women are exhausted from loving deeply, giving endlessly, and still feeling ignored, taken for granted, or emotionally invisible. This conversation is not about playing games or becoming someone you're not. It's about understanding how emotional dynamics work, especially when it comes to a man's ego and attraction. Many women believe that if they love harder, explain better, or stay available longer, a man will finally see their value. But psychology teaches us something very different. Attraction doesn't grow from overgiving. Respect doesn't come from over-explaining. An obsession is never born from convenience. A man's ego is closely tied to how important he feels in your life. When your attention is guaranteed, when your emotions are predictable, his mind relaxes. But when your value is felt and not freely handed over, his awareness sharpens. He begins to notice. He begins to question. And most importantly, he begins to emotionally invest. This topic is not about hurting someone out of anger. It's about disrupting emotional complacency. It's about learning when to step back, when to stay silent, and when to let your absence speak louder than your words. Because sometimes the most powerful message a woman can send is not spoken, it's felt. Today's message will help you understand how emotional control, self-respect, and strategic distance can shift a man's mindset, not to trap him, but to reveal his true intentions. And in that process, you don't lose yourself, you reclaim yourself. Because the moment you stop proving your worth is the moment your worth becomes undeniable. A man's ego is deeply connected to his sense of value, and this is one of the most misunderstood dynamics in relationships. Many people think ego is about arrogance, dominance, or showing off, but at its core, ego is about significance. A man wants to feel that his presence matters, that his actions have impact, and that his role in your life is meaningful. From a psychological point of view, this need for value is tied to identity. When a man feels useful, chosen, and respected, his ego feels stable. When that feeling is threatened, even subtly, his mind immediately goes into correction mode. He starts thinking, analyzing, and emotionally re-engaging to restore that sense of importance. Here is where many women unintentionally weaken attraction. When you overgive, over-explain, or constantly reassure a man of his place in your life, you remove the challenge that keeps his ego alert. If he knows without question that you will always be there, always respond, always forgive, and always adjust, his sense of value becomes passive. He doesn't have to earn his position. And when value is not earned, it is rarely protected. The ego relaxes when effort is no longer required. A man's ego thrives on contribution. He wants to feel that what he does affects how you feel about him. When his effort directly connects to your emotional availability, his mind stays engaged. But when your emotional investment remains high, regardless of his behavior, his ego stops associating effort with reward. This is not because he is careless, but because human psychology responds to patterns. If the pattern teaches him that your presence is guaranteed, his subconscious treats it as a constant rather than something to maintain. When a woman understands this, she stops trying to raise her value through more sacrifice and instead allows her value to be felt through boundaries. Boundaries are not punishments. They are signals. They communicate that access to you is meaningful. And this is where the ego shift begins. The moment a man senses that his actions influence your availability, his ego becomes attentive. He starts to notice his words. He reflects on his effort. He becomes emotionally invested again, not out of fear, but out of desire to matter. Hurting a man's ego in a healthy sense does not mean attacking his confidence or insulting him. That damages connection and builds resentment. The real impact comes from removing emotional certainty. When you stop centering your life around his responses, when you stop adjusting your worth based on his attention, his ego feels the change. Not because you disappeared, but because you reclaimed your independence. That independence sends a powerful psychological message. Your value exists with or without his validation. Men are naturally drawn to situations where their role feels important. If he feels replaceable, not threatened but irrelevant, his ego reacts. The human mind is wired to avoid loss, especially loss of significance. When he feels that he might lose emotional priority in your life, his awareness sharpens. He becomes more present, more curious, and more invested. This is not manipulation. This is a natural response to perceived value. Another critical aspect is respect. A man's ego is not fed by control, it is fed by respect. Respect grows when a woman respects herself enough to not overextend. When you say no without guilt, when you pause instead of reacting, and when you choose calm over chaos, you signal emotional maturity. That maturity challenges his ego in a powerful way. He realizes he is dealing with a woman who is not desperate for attention, but selective with her energy. That realization alone shifts how he views you. When his ego is tied to your approval, he becomes more conscious of his behavior. Not because he is afraid of losing you, but because he wants to maintain his place in your emotional world. This is where obsession often begins, not an obsession with control, but obsession with relevance. He wants to know where he stands. He wants to feel that he still matters. And uncertainty activates the mind far more than reassurance ever could. Many women fear that pulling back will push a man away. In reality, pulling back reveals the truth. If his ego responds with effort, curiosity, and presence, it means he values the connection. If it responds with indifference, it means the attachment was one-sided. Either way, the woman wins because she is no longer pouring into a space that does not reciprocate. Understanding that a man's ego is tied to value changes how you approach relationships. You stop performing for love and start allowing love to meet you where you stand. You stop chasing validation and start observing effort. And the moment you do that, you shift from being emotionally available on demand to being emotionally valuable by choice. That shift doesn't just change how he treats you, it changes how you see yourself. Absence creates psychological imbalance because the human mind is not comfortable with sudden emotional gaps. When something or someone becomes part of a routine, the brain registers it as a constant. Messages, calls, attention, emotional availability, these all become patterns. Once a pattern is established, the mind expects it to continue. When that pattern is interrupted, even gently, the brain reacts. It starts asking questions. It looks for meaning. It tries to restore balance. This is where emotional pull begins, not through presence, but through what is suddenly missing. Many women believe that staying constantly available will secure connection, but psychology shows the opposite. Constant availability removes tension, and tension is what keeps the mind engaged. When a man knows exactly when you will respond, how you will react, and that you will always be emotionally there regardless of his effort, his brain settles into comfort. Comfort is calm, but it is not obsession. Obsession requires movement, curiosity, and unresolved emotion. Absence introduces all three. When emotional access is reduced, the mind fills in the silence. A man begins to replay interactions, analyze conversations, and question his position. This happens because the brain is trying to regain equilibrium. It wants to understand why the familiar rhythm has changed. Was it something he said, something he didn't do? Is he losing importance? These internal questions are far more powerful than any explanation you could give him because they force self-reflection rather than defensiveness. The key detail here is how absence is created. Healthy absence is not punishment, coldness, or manipulation. It is the natural result of self-focus and emotional boundaries. When you shift your attention back to your life, your goals, and your peace, your energy changes. You are no longer waiting. You are living. And that change is felt even without words. The absence is not dramatic. It is calm. That calm is what unsettles him because it signals that your emotional world is no longer orbiting around him. The human brain is wired to notice loss more intensely than gain. Psychologists call this loss sensitivity. When something is always present, it fades into the background. When it is removed, even partially, it becomes highlighted. A man may not have fully appreciated your consistency, your care, or your emotional support while it was constant, but when it is reduced, his awareness sharpens. He starts to recognize the emotional comfort he took for granted. This is why silence often speaks louder than confrontation. Arguments give the mind something external to push against. Silence gives the mind space to turn inward. When you stop over-explaining or defending your feelings, you remove his ability to dismiss them. Instead, he is left alone with his thoughts, and those thoughts tend to circle back to you because you are now an unresolved emotional variable. Absence also disrupts power dynamics. When one person is always available and the other is inconsistent, the imbalance creates dependency on one side and complacency on the other. By stepping back, you restore balance. You remove yourself from the role of emotional provider on demand. This forces him to either step up emotionally or step away completely. Both outcomes provide clarity, which is something many women lack when they stay constantly present. It is important to understand that obsession is not created by being missed once. It is created by repeated moments of emotional absence that are not filled with reassurance. When a man reaches out and you respond calmly rather than eagerly, when you are present but not over-invested, the imbalance remains just enough to keep his mind engaged. He cannot fully relax because he is no longer certain of his emotional position. That uncertainty drives attention. Another powerful effect of absence is that it allows your value to be felt rather than proven. When you are always there, you often feel the need to explain your worth, your intentions, and your feelings. When you step back, your absence becomes the evidence. He feels the difference in energy, in connection, and in emotional warmth. That feeling is far more convincing than words. Many women fear that creating distance will make them seem uncaring. In reality, it often does the opposite. It communicates self-respect. It shows that your life is full, that your time is meaningful, and that your emotional energy is not unlimited. This challenges a man's assumptions and forces him to reassess how he engages with you. If he values the connection, he will move toward you. If he does not, the distance reveals that truth quickly. Absence does not guarantee someone will come back, but it guarantees something more important, self-alignment. You are no longer chasing attention. You are allowing interest to reveal itself. And when a man moves towards you after experiencing that psychological imbalance, it is not because you begged or convinced him. It is because his own mind led him there. Emotional control is one of the most powerful yet underestimated forces in human relationships. Most people believe that strong emotion creates strong bonds, but psychology shows that it is not the intensity of emotion that creates attachment. It is the regulation of it. When a woman reacts, Emotionally, to every shift in a man's behavior, she gives away her internal balance. In contrast, when she remains calm, centered, and measured, she introduces uncertainty. That uncertainty quietly challenges a man's ego and forces him to reassess the dynamic. When a man pulls away, ignores messages, or becomes inconsistent, the common response is emotional reaction, questioning, confronting, explaining, or over-communicating feelings. While this may feel honest and vulnerable, it often has the opposite effect of what is intended. Emotional reactions signal that he still has control over your emotional state. His ego feels secure knowing that his actions still provoke a response. And when the ego feels secure without effort, there is no urgency to change. Emotional control disrupts this pattern. When a man expects a reaction and receives calm instead, his brain experiences a break in prediction. The human mind relies heavily on predictability. When expectations are not met, attention increases. He begins to notice. He starts to wonder. Silence or calm responses create more psychological impact than emotional outbursts ever could because they force internal processing rather than external conflict. This does not mean suppressing feelings or becoming emotionally cold. Emotional control is not emotional absence, it is emotional mastery. It is the ability to feel deeply without letting feelings dictate behavior. When you pause instead of reacting, you give yourself power. You choose when and how to respond rather than being driven by impulse. That pause alone shifts the emotional hierarchy in the relationship. A man's ego is particularly sensitive to emotional control because it removes validation. Ego feeds on reaction, positive or negative. Anger, tears, repeated explanations, and emotional appeals all confirm that he matters enough to affect you. Calm, however, removes that confirmation. When he sees that you are no longer emotionally shaken by inconsistency, his sense of influence is challenged. He begins to question whether he still holds the same position in your emotional world. This is where self-respect becomes visible. Emotional control communicates strength without words. It shows that you are grounded, that your self-worth is not dependent on how he shows up in a given moment. That kind of inner stability is rare, and rarity commands attention. A man may not consciously identify why he feels drawn back in, but subconsciously he recognizes that he is dealing with someone emotionally mature and not easily destabilized. Emotional reactions often escalate situations unnecessarily. They turn small issues into power struggles and give the other person the opportunity to deflect responsibility. Calm responses remove that escape route. When you are not arguing, not pleading, and not over-explaining, his behavior stands alone. He cannot blame your emotions for his distance. He is left to confront his own actions and intentions. Another important aspect of emotional control is timing. When you respond immediately to every message or concern, you train his mind to expect instant access. When you allow space before responding, not as a tactic, but as a natural result of prioritizing your life, you shift that expectation. The delay introduces reflection. He becomes more aware of your time, your boundaries, and your independence. That awareness feeds respect, and respect feeds attraction. Many women worry that emotional control will make them seem uninterested. In reality, it often makes them seem secure. Secure energy is attractive because it feels safe and grounded. It suggests that connection with you is a choice, not a necessity driven by fear of loss. This challenges a man's ego in a healthy way because it invites him to earn emotional access rather than assume it. When emotional control replaces emotional reaction, the relationship dynamic transforms. You stop chasing clarity and start observing consistency. You stop trying to be understood and start requiring effort. This shift places you back at the center of your own emotional world. And from that position, you are no longer trying to pull someone towards you. You are allowing them to decide whether they are willing to meet you where you stand. Ultimately, emotional control is not about changing him. It is about stabilizing yourself. And in doing so, you naturally change how he experiences you. He feels the difference. He senses the shift. And that subtle, quiet strength is often what draws him back. Not because he feels pressured, but because he feels challenged in the most powerful way possible. Obsession is not created by constant presence or unlimited availability. It is created by uncertainty. The human mind becomes deeply engaged when something feels partially known but not fully secured. When everything is clear, guaranteed, and predictable, attention relaxes. But when something valuable feels just slightly out of reach, the mind fixates on it. This is why uncertainty plays such a powerful role in emotional attachment, especially when it comes to attraction and desire. Many women are taught that consistency and reassurance are the keys to keeping a man interested. While consistency builds safety, too much emotional availability without balance can quietly weaken attraction. When a man knows exactly where he stands at all times, his emotional investment often decreases. His mind no longer needs to wonder, question, or pursue. The mystery disappears, and with it, the psychological tension that fuels obsession. Uncertainty does not mean confusion created through mixed signals or manipulation. Healthy uncertainty comes from self-respect and emotional independence. It arises when a woman does not center her entire emotional world around a man. When she has her own rhythm, priorities, and boundaries, her availability becomes selective rather than automatic. That selectivity is what creates intrigue. He begins to wonder how he fits into her life rather than assuming he is the center of it. When a woman over-explains her feelings, constantly seeks reassurance, or repeatedly asks for clarity, she removes uncertainty. She tells him exactly how important he is and exactly how much power he holds emotionally. While this may feel honest, it often leads to complacency. The ego relaxes when it feels fully secure. Without uncertainty, there is no urgency to invest more. A man becomes more emotionally engaged when he is unsure about his emotional position, not insecure, but curious. Curiosity keeps the mind active. It leads him to reflect on his behavior, his effort, and his intentions. He starts paying closer attention to how you respond, how available you are, and how you prioritize him. That attention is the foundation of obsession. One of the most powerful ways uncertainty is created is through emotional consistency paired with limited access. You are kind, calm, and respectful, but you are not always available. You respond with warmth, but you do not overextend. This balance confuses the ego in a productive way. He cannot label you as distant, but he also cannot take you for granted. The mind stays engaged because it cannot fully predict you. Uncertainty also protects your self-worth. When you stop proving your value and start allowing it to be discovered, you shift the emotional dynamic. A man begins to feel that being close to you is something to be earned rather than assumed. This does not come from playing hard to get. It comes from genuinely having a full life. When your happiness does not depend on his presence, your energy naturally becomes magnetic. Many men do not realize they are becoming obsessed until they notice how often you cross their mind. That happens in moments of absence, not presence. When he wonders what you are doing, who you are with, or why you seem calm instead of reactive, his thoughts return to you. The mind tries to resolve uncertainty, and until it does, attention remains locked. Another important element is emotional restraint. When you share everything you feel immediately, you remove the space for imagination. When you choose what to share and when, you allow the connection to unfold gradually. That gradual unfolding keeps interest alive. It gives the mind time to attach meaning to each interaction rather than consuming everything at once. Women often fear that uncertainty will push a man away. In reality, it reveals his level of investment. A man who is genuinely interested will move closer when he feels uncertainty. He will communicate, initiate, and show effort. A man who only enjoys convenience will fade. In both cases, uncertainty works in your favor because it filters intention. Obsession that grows from uncertainty is not unhealthy when it is rooted in respect. It does not create anxiety, it creates focus. He becomes focused on maintaining connection, on staying relevant in your life, and on earning emotional closeness. That focus strengthens attraction because it is self-driven rather than forced. Ultimately, uncertainty reminds a man that your presence is a choice, not a guarantee. And when a woman is chosen rather than assumed, her value rises. That rise in value is what keeps the mind engaged, the ego attentive, and the emotional connection alive.